Welcome back, guys and gals. We're starting this video on the bandsaw again, and here I'm going to be walking through some of the elements of piecing this mosaic hex pattern together, fabricating the little bits. Here I've got a 30-degree angle set on the bandsaw, and I'm sawing two pieces at a time to save time. I already did a bunch of fiddly little work to figure out exactly where that depth stop needed to be set for all these pieces to come out with minimal grinding necessary to fit up. And this was just a whole lot of sawing. I had to make sure to anneal the stock to not wear my bandsaw blade out. Stuff like that. I didn't bother cutting these with coolant because I had the steel pretty nice and soft. And these pieces have a core of twist damascus and then edges of 1080, so they'll look hopefully like twisted rope almost, or twisted twine, with that black edge to give kind of an over and under effect where they weave across each other. And that's the plan. You never know how things are going to come out in the end, but hope for the best, plan for the worst. Nice little handful of hot chips of Damascus. Now here we got the variable speed disc sander. I've got this table set up at exactly a 30-degree angle as well. And then I have just basically a straight bar clamped as a jig, a right angle jig on the table there. And I'm just forcing that angle up to the disc by hand to clean up both sides, deburr it on all sides. Make sure there's nothing that's going to stand it off of the other pieces at some weird angle or create a gap. So there was just a ton of this to do with a pile of these little bitty parts as well. The disc grinder itself is a pretty cool unit. There was a fella, I think it was Kevin Powers, years ago on Blade forums, came up with, well, he authored this CAD design. And he designed it to be just cuttable on a pretty standard plasma cutter table, CNC plasma cutter, at a 1/4-inch plate. I think 1 foot by 2 foot, a 1/4-inch plate, as a shareable file to create a disc grinder, weld together disc grinder kit. And he shared it with all of us, and it actually worked quite well, and it's been a great little grinder. So who knows, maybe you can still get that from Kevin if you go look way back into Blade forums and try to contact him. Don't quote me on that. Now we're over at the Portaband station. Next to it is my little 1x42 red grinder, and I do a lot of work here, just cutting parts and deburring. It's a pretty handy little station for light work, pins, bolts, whatever, liners. But here I'm cutting up that hex stock to length, and I like to use the Portaband because it's got a much finer blade than the big saw. So I'm actually going to save some material over the course of several cuts here. Forcing it through with a push stig, then I'll take it over and deburr each piece as I go. And then I'm actually, after deburring, marking each piece individually against a piece from the rest of the mosaic stack, so they're all the perfect height to fit inside that packet that the billet will finally be. Yeah, you can see there's a billet piece. I'm using it as a straight edge to scribe that die chem to edge of my hex bar. All kind of fiddly, but you know, you get into a rhythm, and next thing you know, you got a pile of pieces. I've had this little red grinder forever. It's a 1x42, and it's made in Quebec, actually Canada, by Veal Tools Company. It's a Veal S5. It was my first knife making grinder. I actually made quite a few knives on it, flat grind knives, back in the Hawaii days, and sold them to pig hunters and the like. But now it's living a second life as a knife sharpening and deburring grinder, and it keeps going strong. Great little knife sharpener. But here it's just a lot of, getting every conceivable little crumb off the edge so that piece doesn't develop a gap against any of the other pieces. And I would do a lot of that tedious stuff for a while and then get a nice little handful of both of these types of pieces and come over and piece them together just for a break, bit by bit. If I'd done them all at once, it would have driven me crazy. Plus, it's always a risk doing all of the parts at once if there's a lot of them, because if a problem develops and you don't notice it, well, then you've wasted a lot of parts and a lot of work. But these all came out nicely. It's actually kind of satisfying fitting them all together when they're just right. In the background, that piece of paper that it's all sitting on was the original scaled pattern drawing printed out from my computer. And I started piecing it out on there to match the paper, but I'm actually doing a different pattern orientation than the paper I figured out. So now this right here was an extra fun bit. I'm just taking little 30-degree corners off of the ends of these same tiny billets. Just got to cut me a pile of these equilateral triangle slivers. Kind of ridiculous little pieces, but so satisfying when you fit them all in. Check this out. I had to cut 22 of these little guys just to do the edges on this, but it was all worth it, just getting to put them in there and just seeing how it all fit up with no gaps. If it doesn't weld, I am not going to try this pattern again for probably a year or two. It takes that long to recover in my experience. Now look at these little pieces. These are edge bar pieces. It's mosaic edge bar. So these have pattern in them. And they'll all be etched, polished and etched, so I can orient the pattern in them correctly with how I want it to present down the edge of the knife. Then I'm going to make a top edge bar, which we'll be seeing, of ladder edge pattern to squeeze it all together with, some end caps with angles, and then I'm going to put shim stock on the outside and underneath to make a packet of it. Now here I am at the surface grinder. This is my ladder edge bar I'm going to use for the top edge. I'll explain more about that probably in the next installment. But for now, it's just a brute job on the grinder, grinding all the teeth off. Anyone who's ever made ladder damascus will know all about the work involved in just roughing that volume of steel off, and the surface grinder handles it amazingly well. Matter of fact, sometimes you'll be cutting away and turn your back for a minute, and all of a sudden, bango, it's done, like magic. I just don't know how that works. And we have a nice clean bar, but inside, it's still got a ripple to the grain. And I like to turn that on its side and use that as kind of like an Art Deco squiggle approach. In order to do that, I'm going to have to rip strips out of it. I'm using a tile here from another billet from another set of knives that I'm making. I'm going to incorporate this steel into that for an edge bar, as well as the Hex Mosaic piece that we've been working on. So here I'm marking out a pair of parallel lines to the thickness of that tile so it'll match that billet. And doing the whole die cam, straight edges, scribe thing. And here's a piece from the Hex Mosaic billet I'm putting alongside of it with an allowance for kerf. I'll mark a set of parallel lines for that, and then that'll be the top bar for the Hex Mosaic billet. And scribing some straight edge lines to saw down with the Powermatic. The first cut I'm going to do is going to be just to rip the edge off so we don't get any ugly distorted stuff ending up in the actual blade that we want. Fun times, I tell you. I actually developed a rip sled for ripping bars on this saw, and you'll see it in another video, but I didn't break it out just for this small job. If I have to rip thick stuff, I absolutely use the gravity rip sled. But that will conclude this installment. Stay tuned for Hex Mosaic 2, wherein we will maybe even get to the point of having a billet tacked up and ready for the fire. Thanks for watching, all.